everybody. Joseph P. Farrell, news and views from the Nefarium for June 21st, 2012, the year of the apocalypse. It hasn't happened yet. Still kind of waiting for that one. For those of you on Facebook and YouTube, you'll probably be seeing this actually before the website. I'm pre-recording a bunch of these news and views since I'll be gone for a couple of weeks. But I'm trying to pre-record them so that there will still be the same amount of little video blogs out there. So, with that in mind and that taken care of, again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I want to thank everybody that's members on the website for the donations, the memberships and everything, the prayers especially. And that leads me to this interesting story. And it's posted by Reuters, all right? And pardon my sinus again, but that's part of this story. It's part of the unwritten part of the story because Reuters, it has always been rumored, is very definitely in the hip pocket of the Rothschild family interest, according to some people. So in other words, what we have here is a story of the elite spinning something, and I want to read the story. It's not very long. It's only one page. But I want you to pay attention to something that occurred in this when I read it, and I thought, oh my, these people are desperate, aren't they? All right, here we go. Gross domestic product grew 2.4% quarter on quarter in the first 3 months of the year to put annual economic growth at 4.5% in the period, the highest since the first quarter of 2008, data from the Statistics Office showed on Friday. Now, what country are we talking about here? Well, the headline is, Iceland economy grows at fastest pace in 4 years. In other words, turn the clock back here, folks. 4 years ago, Iceland was melting down. The IMF and the other international bankers stepped in and said, you must do this and you must do that. And Iceland, of course, ended up throwing a bunch of bankers in jail. All right? To continue, and here comes the spin. Iceland successfully completed a bailout program led by the International Monetary Fund last year and has returned to bond markets. Forecasts for 2012 indicate gross domestic product growth will be the strongest among developed countries, the central bank has said. Now, folks, there's the spin right there. In other words, the IMF rescued Iceland. They followed our program, and now look, folks, oh, wonderful, wonderful, Iceland's economy is booming. And, of course, this means that Reuters is spinning the story for the central bankers and for their benefit. But is it really the truth? And as I said, it's probably a half-truth because Iceland, as I also mentioned, threw a bunch of their bankers in jail, precisely those bankers involved in the trading of derivatives, fraudulent securities, and so on. And in my opinion, folks, let me be very clear. The credit default swaps, the derivatives crisis that led to all of this, they were fraudulent, pure and simple. They were a big Ponzi scheme. And all of the banks that dealt in these types of securities were committing, and I think knowingly so, acts of fraud. They knew that at some point that bubble would burst. And as I indicated in Babylon's Banksters, the formula of the Chinese mathematician Dr. David Lee that led to the creation of these derivatives, and that to a certain extent was the formula that was followed by these banks, as I indicated there, when Dr. Lee came up with this formula, he completely dispensed with any historical market data, for which there was very little to begin with. And he created a formula that was purely a theoretical projection. All right. Now, the problem there was that because the derivatives coupled so many different kinds of loan default guarantees, that a downturn in the market in any one sector could influence that whole interconnected set of derivatives and cause the bubble to collapse. And that's exactly what we saw happen. Now we add to this, folks, the practice that some banks were actually having, at least in this country, having people actually commit fraud and signing people's names on fraudulent mortgage securities. Robo-signing, it was called. Just go ahead and sign the paperwork and ram it on through. We want to extend all of this credit. And the reason why the banks were doing that is precisely because those loans were tied up in that huge derivatives market that was being driven by those credit default swaps. So in other words, they were deliberately doing this in order to expand the portfolio of derivatives and reap all of the profits and dividends from those portfolios. When the housing market turned, that market collapsed. So these banks were clearly fraudulent. Now this practice went on in Iceland, and we saw what Iceland's response was. Unlike almost any other country in the European Union, Iceland jailed those bankers that were following that practice. All right, they were the only country that had the cojones to step up and call a halt to it. The other problem is that although this Reuters story is spinning it to a certain degree, Iceland didn't, as I recall, if I recall correctly, Iceland didn't completely toe the IMF line. So the central bankers here are really putting out the line that all is well, trust us, follow our formula, follow our program, and your economy will be booming again in a mere 4 short years. The message being sent here, folks, is being sent to Greece, Italy, Spain, and Portugal. Just knuckle under, follow our program, and all will be well. Now, I doubt very much that they're going to do that. The IMF, for one thing, is increasingly perceived in Europe as a shill for American financial interests and foreign policy, and that's what it is. So I doubt you're going to see the same sort of response in the rest of Europe. So this is a very interesting story, folks. I want to thank you all again for tuning in. I apologize I'm having to pre-record these, but I hope you'll understand the circumstances, and I'll see you all on the flip side, everybody. Bye-bye, and God bless.